Have you ever lain awake, late at night, feeling the weight of a universe that doesn't care? Nietzsche did too, and what he discovered there might be the most liberating philosophy ever written. By the end of this journey, you'll understand how to transform that crushing meaninglessness into profound freedom, how to stop searching for cosmic purpose and start creating your own, how to love your life exactly as it is, not despite the suffering, but including it. This is what changes everything. You see, most thinkers try to comfort us with meaning, purpose, divine plans. Nietzsche saw through all of it. The universe offers nothing. No cosmic significance, no predetermined path, no ultimate truth waiting to be found, just silence. In that silence, most of us panic. We desperately fill the void with distractions, beliefs, anything to avoid facing the emptiness. But Nietzsche heard something else in that cosmic quiet, an invitation. Through years of solitude in Swiss mountains, through migraines that left him bedridden for days, through a loneliness that would have broken most minds, he developed a radical response. He called it amor fati, loving your fate, all of it. So settle in, let the day's tensions dissolve, and allow yourself to simply listen, whether you're seeking sleep, wrestling with your own questions, or just need companionship in the dark hours. I'll walk you through his insights, slowly and gently. Because when you truly understand what Nietzsche saw in that void, insomnia becomes less frightening. Life becomes an artwork only you can create. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Diagnosing Decadence. The story of Nietzsche's thought begins with a diagnosis. Imagine a doctor, exceptionally sharp-eyed, walking through the wards of a grand hospital called 19th century Europe. The patients are well-dressed. They speak of progress and enlightenment. They congratulate themselves on their fine manners and their scientific achievements. The doctor sees through the facade. He smells a sickness in the air, a deep, spiritual exhaustion. He scribbles furious notes detailing a cultural ailment. The official name of the disease is decadence. He saw a state of elegant decay where civilization lives in the wreckage of its own grandest ideas, pretending the building hasn't already collapsed. His definition of decadence was precise. For 2,000 years, Western culture had built its house on a single mighty foundation, Christian morality guaranteed by a Christian God. This system did everything. It gave suffering a meaning. It defined good and evil. It provided a set of unquestionable commands that held society together. It was a complete, interlocking view of the world. Nietzsche, with his philosopher's fine nose, sniffed the air and realized the foundation had crumbled. Belief was draining away. Yet people carried on as if nothing had happened. They wanted to keep the morality, but ditch the God who guaranteed it. He saw this most clearly in the English. They imagined that once you get rid of the inconvenience of faith, you can just carry on with the moral rule book, as if it were self-evident. For Nietzsche, This was an intellectual absurdity, a profound lie. Christian morality, he argued, only makes sense if you accept the whole system, God, transcendence, the promise of another world. To pull out the main concept, faith in God, and expect the rest to stand is like pulling the king from a house of cards. The whole thing is destined to fall. This attempt to live on borrowed values, to preserve the conclusions while denying the premises, was the very definition of decay. He dramatized this moment in one of philosophy's most startling scenes, the parable of the madman, a frantic figure, lantern lit in the bright morning, runs into the marketplace shouting, "I seek God! I seek God!" The crowd, full of enlightened non-believers, just laughs at him. They don't understand his terror. "Whither is God?" The madman cries, "I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers." This cry announced a catastrophe of cosmic proportions. It meant that the entire horizon had been wiped away, that the world was unchained from its sun, plunging into an endless nothing. The onlookers in the marketplace, like Nietzsche's own contemporaries, just stared. They felt no sense of loss, because they failed to grasp what they had lost. They had lost the linchpin of their world. The deepest consequence of this event, Nietzsche prophesied, would be the rise of a terrifying guest, nihilism, the feeling that nothing has any value, that life is pointless, that all our striving means nothing. Without God, the old answer to the question, why, was gone, and there was nothing to replace it. Humanity was left staring into an abyss of its own making. The symptoms of this decadence were everywhere, if you knew how to look. Nietzsche coined a term for its chief carriers, the Philistine of culture. This was the modern, educated man. He knew about art. He could talk about philosophy. He could list historical facts. Yet none of it touched him. It had no effect on how he lived. Culture was a set of ornaments, a way to pass the time, an enterprise that produced shallow pamphlets instead of vital works. It was knowledge without wisdom, information without transformation. This created a world of hollow men, living lives of quiet, comfortable desperation. And what were their ambitions? The new goal, the great project of this decadent age, was simply the elimination of suffering. The highest aspiration was to be comfortable, safe, and untroubled. This drive towards a bland, universal happiness would eventually produce what Nietzsche called the last man, a creature who has a little pleasure for the day and a little pleasure for the night, but holds health in the highest regard. A small, blinking, pitiable being for whom all the great struggles of history have culminated in a world without risk, without passion, and without purpose. Against this creeping mediocrity, Nietzsche positioned himself as the great diagnostician, the philosopher as physician. His task was to be unflinching. He had to trace the sickness back to its roots. to perform a genealogy of our morals, to show where they came from and why they were now poisoning us. His project was a radical one. He knew that certain actions had to be avoided for society to function. He aimed to find reasons to encourage and avoid actions that had nothing to do with the old, dying moral framework. This meant he had to learn to think differently, and ultimately to feel differently. He had to oppose the entire moral interpretation of existence that had ruled the West for centuries. It was a lonely, often painful task. He was, in his own words, a spirit condemned to defy all risks, to sail into uncharted waters, leaving the supposed safety of the shore behind. He was clearing the ground. He was trying to see if, after the complete collapse of the old world, a new, stronger, more life-affirming culture was even possible. So, we have the Diagnosis, a culture sick with decadence, haunted by the ghost of a dead god, and sliding towards a meaningless comfort. The question that electrified Nietzsche, and the question we will follow, is what comes next. How did he use the ghosts of Greek tragedy, the history of master and slave, and the very concept of truth itself to understand this condition? What terrifying, beautiful, and utterly strange cure did he propose for an illness his world had not yet even realized it had? The story of his answer begins with the roar of ancient gods. Chapter 2. Apollo and Dionysus. Nietzsche's first book landed like a strange, incandescent meteor in the tidy world of German academia. He was only 27. The book was called The Birth of Tragedy, and its reception among his scholarly colleagues was predictably hostile. For others, its rhapsodic style and whirlwind of ideas were intoxicating. The book makes an audacious claim right from the start. It proposes that the continuous development of art derives from the duality of two powerful primal forces. He gave them names borrowed from the Greek gods, the Apolline and the Dionysiac. First, we meet the Apolline. This is the art of appearance, the world of beautiful illusion. Nietzsche asks us to think of our dreams. In a dream, everything can possess an extraordinary clarity, a lucid and peaceful quality, even when the scenes are unsettling. This is the spirit of Apollo. It gives hard, clean edges to what it depicts. It is the principle of form, of order, and of individuality. It finds its purest expression in sculpture, with its perfect, defined bodies, and in the epic poetry of Homer, which delights us with its bright, heroic spectacle. The world of Homer's gods is a profoundly Apolline creation. The ancient Greeks, living hard lives, shadowed by battle and death, showed a heroic, artistic instinct. They invented a divine realm of Olympians who were beautiful, reckless, and blissfully irresponsible. These gods were a fiction that made existence on earth bearable. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote that only as an aesthetic phenomenon is the world justified. The Apolline impulse creates a beautiful dream, a veil of appearance that allows us to look upon life with delight. Then we feel the tremors of the other force, the Dionysiac. This is the realm of intoxication, the polar opposite of Apolline clarity. Think of the feeling when music washes over you, when the boundaries of the self begin to dissolve in ecstatic rhythm. That is the touch of Dionysus. It is the experience of chaos, of rapture, of losing your individuality and merging with a primal, collective oneness. This underlying reality is a formless, frightening swirl of both pain and pleasure, a witch's brew of profound feeling. The Greeks knew of the raw, terrifying versions of this impulse. They saw the Dionysian festivals of the barbarians, with their extravagant lack of discipline and their unleashing of savage natural instincts. The Greek genius was to take this force and give it an artistic form. Their own Dionysian art, especially music, allowed for this ecstatic release and a taste of the primal reality. It let them experience this terrifying truth of existence without being completely destroyed by it. These two tendencies, Apollo and Dionysus, walk side by side through the world of art. Their relationship is a violent opposition. They are perpetually in conflict, inciting one another to create ever more powerful and beautiful things. The cool, measured dream world of Apollo is constantly challenged by the chaotic, boundary-dissolving frenzy of Dionysus. This clash is immensely fruitful. It is the engine of creation, the tension that gives birth to the most profound forms of art. With this framework, Nietzsche constructed what he would later call his artist's metaphysics. He built a philosophy that gives primacy to our aesthetic experience. He asks us to consider what the world must be like for us to have these two powerful, competing, artistic experiences. He tests his ideas by their beauty and their explanatory power for art, seeing the world through the eyes of an artist. It is a philosophy born from the feeling of art itself. This vision helps to answer an ancient question. Why do we enjoy tragedy? What allows us to face the horror of existence and find it meaningful? The answer lies in the wisdom of Silenus, the companion of Dionysus, who claimed that the best thing for a human is to never have been born, and the second best is to die soon. Faced with this bleak truth, the Greeks required a powerful artistic medicine. They needed a way to face the Dionysian abyss without flinching, a way to affirm life even in its strangeness and its sorrow. This leads to a profound human transformation in his philosophy. In the age of Homer, man was an artist who created the gods as a beautiful, shielding illusion. Then, in the subsequent age, man himself becomes a work of art. The artistic power of nature, the full force of the primal oneness, reveals itself through the human being in a state of Dionysian rapture. people move from creating beautiful appearances to embodying and confronting the awesome, destructive, and eternal reality that lies beneath. The Apolline and the Dionysiac, the god of the dream and the god of intoxication, are locked in a perpetual creative struggle. One builds up the beautiful world of the individual. The other shatters it in a moment of ecstatic unity. This divine conflict, this sacred tension, found its most perfect and powerful expression in a single, fleeting art form. The wrestling of these two gods, at last, begot a work of art that was as Dionysiac as it was Apolline, Attic tragedy. Chapter 4. The Birth and Death of Greek Tragedy. The perfect fusion of the two warring gods, Apollo and Dionysus, gave birth to the highest form of art the Greeks ever produced, Attic tragedy. For a brief, brilliant period, the playwrights Aeschylus and Sophocles created works of breathtaking power. When the Athenian audience gathered in the theater, they were part of a profound communal ritual. The chorus on stage, with its passionate songs and movements, was a mirror of the spectators themselves, their own suffering and joy raised to a mythic, overpowering height. They were witnessing a reflection of their own deepest truths. Tragedy was a powerful tool for living. It gave the Greeks a way to look directly into the Dionysian abyss, to confront the raw, terrifying heart of existence, and to endure it. How is this possible? The drama was shielded by a beautiful Apolline veil. The clearly defined characters, the elegant poetry of the dialogue, the structure of the plot, all of these elements of order and beauty protected the viewer from the chaotic formlessness of the Dionysian truth they were experiencing through the music and the myth. The tragic hero stands at the center of this experience. He is a sacrificial victim. He takes upon himself the full force of the Dionysian reality, the torment and ecstasy of the primal oneness, and is destroyed by it. The audience, by witnessing his sacrifice through the mediating beauty of the play, comes as close as possible to this direct contact with reality and survives. This experience brings about a kind of metaphysical comfort, a feeling that life is, at the bottom of things, indestructibly powerful and joyous, even amidst its pain. It is a transfiguration of horror into the sublime. Then a new figure appeared in Athens, a man who would, in Nietzsche's telling, unravel this delicate artistic miracle. His name was Socrates. Nietzsche paints him as a new kind of human, almost a monstrosity. In a healthy, productive person, instinct is the great creative and affirmative force, while consciousness plays a critical role. In Socrates, this relationship was inverted. His consciousness became the creator, and his instinct merely a critic. He was a man driven by an unshakable faith in the power of reason. The image of this strange, rational man would fascinate and torment Nietzsche for the rest of his life. The weapon Socrates wielded against the tragic age was his relentless optimism. He operated on a few simple, powerful formulas that would reshape the Western mind. First, virtue is knowledge. Second, all sins arise from ignorance. Third, the virtuous man is the happy man. For Nietzsche, these three basic optimistic maxims were the death sentence for tragedy. The tragic spirit accepts suffering as a deep, mysterious, and unavoidable part of life. The Socratic spirit sees suffering as a problem, a kind of ignorance that can be solved with correct thinking. This new, optimistic element, which rejoices in cool clarity and logical conclusions, invaded the theater. It demanded that characters have clear motives, that plots have rational explanations, that everything be understandable and ultimately solvable. The mystery was explained away. The terror was tamed. This rationalist impulse, this belief that you can think your way out of the fundamental conditions of existence, is what Nietzsche called aesthetic Socratism. It is the spirit that killed tragedy by making it reasonable. This philosophical shift found its perfect vessel in the playwright Euripides. Nietzsche saw him as the poet of this new Socratic age. Euripides brought the ordinary person onto the stage. He delighted in psychological realism, and his plays are filled with argument and dialectic. The heroic, mythic scale of Aeschylus and Sophocles was reduced. The awesome power of the Dionysian was driven out, replaced by a drama of clever talk and psychological interest. The chorus, once the thrumming heart of the tragedy, withered into a minor element. The tragic hero was replaced by a kind of thinking man who could talk himself out of his fate. The consequences of this change echoed down through the centuries. The entire Western philosophical tradition, built upon the foundations laid by Plato and later by Christianity, inherited this Socratic optimism. It has been, at its core, a tradition that is hostile to the tragic view of life. Even the great tragedies of the modern world, like those of Shakespeare, were, for Nietzsche, missing an essential component. While he saw Hamlet as a brilliant portrait of a Dionysian man, someone who has looked into the truth of the world and is paralyzed by the futility of action, the plays lacked the central unifying force of music. The sovereign powers of music, for Nietzsche, are what give us the most direct access to the Dionysian, to the eternal throb of the will itself. The actual music of the Greek tragedies has been lost to time. We can only guess at its intoxicating effects from the written accounts of how ancient audiences were transported into a state of communal ecstasy, or rausch. This loss is immense. It means we can only ever have a partial intellectual understanding of what Greek tragedy truly was. This is why the composer Richard Wagner became so monumentally important for the young Nietzsche. He saw in Wagner's powerful music dramas the possibility of a grand rebirth of tragedy. Here, it seemed, was a modern artist who could once again fuse myth music, and drama into a single, overwhelming experience. He hoped Wagner could create a new art form that would provide his own decadent age with the same intoxicating, life-affirming power that tragedy had given to the ancient Greeks. This hope would become one of the great passions and one of the great sorrows of his life. Chapter 5. The Break with Wagner. Before the diagnosis, before the years of lonely wandering, there was a friendship. For a brief, brilliant time, the happiest years of Nietzsche's life, he was welcomed into the inner circle of the composer Richard Wagner. He met the maestro and his formidable mistress, Cosima, in 1868, and soon became a cherished visitor at their home in Tribschen on Lake Lucerne. Here, the young professor found a figure who seemed to be the living embodiment of his philosophy. Wagner was the great hope, the artist who could, perhaps, bring about the rebirth of tragedy in the modern world. The air at Tribschen hummed with energy and intellectual fervor. The two men discussed the very ideas that would animate the birth of tragedy, and Wagner himself contributed substantially to some of its central theses. Nietzsche, for his part, became a passionate propagandist for Wagner's cause, particularly for the monumental project that was the Bayreuth Festival. This was meant to be the grand stage for Wagner's new form of music drama, a new art for a new Germany. Nietzsche envisioned it as a sacred event, a place where the community would be united in a common ecstasy, just as the ancient Greeks were at their tragedies. He poured his hopes for the future of German culture into this single enterprise. The festival was going to be a consecrated space, far from the triviality of ordinary opera houses. It would be a site of cultural regeneration, a place where the deep, mythic power of art could heal a fractured and decadent society. The stakes felt impossibly high. The success or failure of Bayreuth seemed tied to the very health of the European spirit. Wagner was the artist's savior, and Nietzsche was his prophet philosopher. The reality of the first Bayreuth Festival in 1876 was a shattering disappointment. Nietzsche arrived full of fevered hope and was met with a scene that horrified him. The audience was a parade of the very people he despised. He saw the crowned heads of Europe, the wealthy and the fashionable, the Philistines of culture, who knew all about art but were immune to its power. The sacred gathering he had dreamed of had turned into a vulgar, high society spectacle, splitting at the seams with people he found repellent. The experience was physically and spiritually crushing. Assailed by his eclipsing headaches and appalled by the company, Nietzsche fled the festival grounds and sought refuge in the nearby countryside. The grand dream had dissolved into a nightmare of compromise and social climbing. There, in the quiet woods, he began to take stock of his relationship with the man and the artist he had idolized. The disillusionment was swift and total. He saw that the practicalities of balancing the books had led Wagner to woo the very audience that made a true artistic experience impossible. The break, when it came, was about more than just the festival. Nietzsche began to see a deep sickness in Wagner's art itself. He saw the composer's turn towards Christian themes as a profound betrayal. The final blow was the text for Wagner's last opera, Parsifal. In this story of a pure fool who becomes a redeemer, Nietzsche saw a complete capitulation to the values he was beginning to see as life-denying. Wagner, the hero of earthly, tragic affirmation, had sunk down helpless and broken before the Christian cross, embracing pity, chastity, and other worldly redemption. There were, of course, deeper and murkier currents at play. For Nietzsche to become his own man, he needed to stop being anyone's disciple. The break was a painful declaration of his own intellectual independence. There may have been personal dynamics, too, including a possible unspoken love for Wagner's wife, Cosima. And then there were Nietzsche's own frustrated artistic ambitions. He was a passionate amateur composer who once had the misfortune of playing his own pieces for Wagner, a moment of profound embarrassment. He was, perhaps, a great creative artist manqué, a man unable to produce art himself, who then ransacked the work of others to purvey his own vision. Ultimately, Wagner the man became Wagner the symbol. In Nietzsche's later writings, proper names almost always stand for vast cultural tendencies. Wagner became his ultimate case study in modern decadence. He was the artist who summed up the entire sickness of the late 19th century, its grandiosity, its nervous theatricality, its intoxicating allure, and its deep-seated opposition to a healthy, life-affirming culture. The personal friendship had to be severed so the philosophical analysis could begin in earnest. The loss of Wagner as a friend and mentor, though necessary, cost Nietzsche more than he could ever fully admit. The man he had once revered would haunt his work until the very end. Wagner appears in his books more frequently than Socrates or Christ, a constant shadow to be wrestled with, a forbidden passion to be denounced again and again. The break was the end of the happiest period of Nietzsche's life. It marked his final withdrawal from the world and propelled him into the desolate solitude where his most dangerous and powerful ideas would be born. Chapter 6. A New Style, the Free Spirit. After the smoke cleared from the explosive break with Wagner, Nietzsche found himself profoundly alone. The grand, romantic, narrative style of his first book felt like a foreign country to him now. The world of myth and ecstatic rebirth had vanished. He dealt with his disillusionment and his escalating health problems in the only way he ever could. He wrote. He wrote prodigiously, and in doing so, he forged a completely new way of doing philosophy. He produced a book that in nearly all respects showed his fast-growing powers, a book for a new kind of thinker. The work was called Human, All Too Human, and its subtitle announced a new ideal, a book for free spirits. The very form of the book was a declaration of independence. It was composed of 9 books with general titles, containing 638 numbered sections. This was the birth of his famous aphoristic style. Each section is a short, sharp, often self-contained observation or argument, sometimes less than a page long, sometimes just a few sentences. This method makes his books incredibly easy to dip into, yet dangerously hard to absorb in their totality. Reading this new kind of book can be an exhausting experience. The reader is bombarded with one brilliant point after another on subjects ranging from social life and passion to the psychology of artists, all displaced at such a rate that the result can feel strangely unmemorable. This is a risky and deliberate strategy. The style is an expression of his revulsion from the pseudo-narrative of his first book. He was moving away from the grand, connecting thread and towards a constellation of glittering, sharp-edged fragments. The free spirit he wrote for was his new philosophical hero. This figure surveys the landscape of human nature with a cool, scientific clarity. The free spirit possesses the sharp, psychological acuity of the great French moralists, dissecting human behavior with a fine scalpel. This ideal marked a complete turn away from his earlier romanticism, with its love of shadow and depth. Everything now had to be seen in the clear light of day, examined with an unflinching gaze. He had traded the intoxicating haze of Dionysus for the bright, cutting light of Apollo. This new hardness and clarity was deeply influenced by French thinkers, especially Voltaire, to whom he dedicated the book. What appealed to Nietzsche in the French tradition was the precision of their style, the way they could tie up a complex human experience in a neat, eye-catching little parcel of prose. He was drawn to their elegant, observational stance. This was a period of lengthy flirtation with their methods, a way of sharpening his own literary and psychological tools against theirs. His goal for the aphorism, however, was unique. The French moralists, like La Rochefoucauld, were masters of encapsulation. They provided a reader with a frisson of shame or recognition about the perennial human condition with no real expectation of change. Nietzsche's aphorisms were designed to be subversive. They are teasings and provocations, directed towards making us feel an enhanced sense of the possibilities of escape from the routine of being ourselves. They are meant to open doors, to unsettle our complacency. The primary method of the free spirit is psychological unmasking. Inhuman, all too human, Nietzsche began to peer behind the curtain of our most cherished ideals. He started to trace our higher values, our art, our passions, our concepts of good and evil, back to their all-too-human origins. He possessed what he would later call a remarkably fine nose for sniffing out the baser instincts, the hidden motivations of vanity, fear, and power that lurk beneath our most sublime aspirations. This book and its sequels show Nietzsche demonstrating an incredible capacity to turn his own harrowing experiences to good purpose. The writing is full of high spirits, with almost no trace of the rancor one might expect from a man in such pain. He proves himself to be a member of that rare breed of thinker on whom nothing is wasted. His own suffering became his laboratory for understanding the human condition in general. Yet, in the light of his later works, one can feel a sense of constraint here, as if he is surveying the scene without yet fully unleashing the will to transform it. His next book, Daybreak, continued this aphoristic mode, but marked a crucial departure in its content. It carries the subtitle, Thoughts on the Prejudices of Morality. After the wide-ranging survey conducted by the Free Spirit, Nietzsche was beginning to zero in on his primary target. He was moving from a general psychological exploration to a direct and sustained assault on the foundations of morality itself. This was the moment he began to get back on the high road of his life's great endeavor. The period of the Free Spirit was a necessary transitional phase. It was a time for him to step back from the intoxicating world of Wagner and tragedy, to sharpen his analytical tools, and to develop the precise, cutting style he would need for the battles ahead. He was learning to philosophize with a light touch, preparing the way for the moment he would pick up his hammer. This cool, clear-eyed psychologist was paving the way for the fiery prophet to come. Chapter 7. The Problem with Morality. With the tools of the Free Spirit sharpened and ready, Nietzsche turned his gaze toward his ultimate target. The period of cool, detached observation was coming to an end. He began a direct, sustained assault on the foundations of morality itself. This new phase of his work was announced by his book Daybreak, with its provocative subtitle, Thoughts on the Prejudices of Morality. The title itself was a promise. A new light was about to be shed on the dark, unexamined corners of our most cherished values. The philosopher was preparing to question everything we thought we knew about good and evil. He opens his attack with a brilliant, two-pronged strategy for denying morality. The first prong is a deep psychological questioning. He asks us to consider whether the moral motives people claim for their actions are their real motives. He suggests that what we call morality is often a web of words, a system of subtle deceptions that we practice on others, and more importantly, on ourselves. The person famed for their virtue might be the most deeply self-deceived of all. This is the art of psychological unmasking taken to a new, more dangerous level. He pokes and prods at our self-satisfaction, suggesting that behind the mask of piety or selflessness, there might be something else entirely, vanity, a lust for power or fear. Our virtues, he implies, may be little more than our most refined and socially acceptable weaknesses. The stories we tell ourselves about why we are good are just that, stories. Convenient fictions that keep us comfortable and shield us from the unruly truth of our own instincts. The second prong of his attack is even more fundamental. He admits that people often do act from what they believe to be moral motives. The problem is that the moral judgments themselves are based on profound errors. He compares the situation to alchemy. He accepts that alchemists truly believed in their premises and acted on them. He just denies that their premises, that you can turn lead into gold, were true. In the same way, people genuinely feel themselves to be moral or immoral, but the entire system of thought that produces these feelings is, for Nietzsche, a fiction. The beliefs in sin, in a divinely commanded law, in the kind of freedom of the will that makes one radically responsible for one's actions, these are the errors that impel people to their moral actions. Our moral world, with its soaring heights of virtue and its terrifying depths of guilt, is built upon a foundation of sand. He then offers a crucial clarification. He says it goes without saying that many actions we call immoral ought to be avoided and resisted, and many called moral ought to be done and encouraged. He is interested in re-evaluating our values. His core argument is that we should do the right things for completely different reasons. The traditional justifications for morality have crumbled. The task now is to find a new, healthier foundation for our actions, one that is rooted in this life. This leads to his ultimate goal in this phase of his work. The challenge, he writes, is that we have to learn to think differently in order at last, perhaps very late on, to attain even more, to feel differently. Sight 376. This is a call for a transformation that goes far deeper than a simple intellectual agreement. He is aiming for a complete re-education of our instincts and emotions. He wants to get underneath the automatic habits of judgment that have been ingrained in us for centuries. This requires us to question the value of the values themselves. Why do we automatically praise pity, humility, or self-sacrifice? What psychological needs do these values serve? Who benefits from them? He wants us to see morality as a system of signs, a language that can tell us about the health or sickness of the culture that produced it. To learn to feel differently is to achieve a new kind of emotional freedom, to be able to assess the world without the distorting lens of inherited prejudice. He demonstrates the confusion at the heart of morality by examining its supposed purpose. Many have claimed that morality exists for the preservation and advancement of mankind. Nietzsche immediately pounces on this vague phrase. Does that mean ensuring humanity has the longest possible existence? Or does it mean achieving the greatest possible de-animalization of humanity? These two goals, he points out, would require completely different, even contradictory, moral codes. This kind of sharp, relentless questioning reveals the flimsy and unexamined assumptions upon which entire ethical systems are built. With daybreak, Nietzsche begins his systematic and unflinching dismantling of our moral world. He exposes the psychological masks we wear and the philosophical errors that structure our lives. He shows us that our sense of good and evil is a contingent, historical creation, one that may have outlived its usefulness and is now beginning to poison us. He has laid out the problem in its starkest terms. The next step in his staggering journey will be to announce the cataclysmic event that makes this re-evaluation so urgent and so terrifying, the death of God. Chapter 8. The Death of God. After charting the ancient sickness of morality, Nietzsche turns to the cataclysmic event that makes its re-evaluation so urgent. In his book, The Gay Science, a work filled with a new confidence and a profound sense of the plight of post-Christian humanity, he makes his most famous and frightening announcement. He does so in a short, explosive parable found in section 125. The section is titled simply, The Madman. The story begins in the bright light of morning. A madman, his eyes wild, bursts into the marketplace holding a lit lantern. He runs through the crowd, crying again and again, "I seek God, I seek God." The people gathered there, many of them atheists themselves, find this spectacle amusing. They laugh at him. They mock his frantic search, asking if God has gotten lost like a little child, or perhaps gone on a voyage. Their laughter is the sound of an age that has no idea what it has done, no inkling of the gravity of the situation. The madman, seeing their incomprehension, grows furious. He leaps into their midst and pierces them with his gaze. "Whither is God?" he cries. "I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I, all of us, are his murderers." This is an announcement of absolute horror. The madman is gripped by a terror the crowd cannot begin to feel. He sees the full implications of this deed, this murder of God, and understands it as a catastrophe of cosmic scale. He tries to make them understand, speaking in images of total collapse. How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? He asks how we could have unchained this earth from its sun, sending it plunging through an endless nothing, its inhabitants shivering in the perpetual cold and darkness of empty space. He is describing a world that has lost its foundation, its orientation, its source of light and warmth. He is describing the absolute devastation of a world without God. The core of this powerful idea is that the death of God is a cultural and historical event. It is the slow erosion over centuries of the belief in the Christian God. The deed has been done, but the news has not yet reached human ears. The madman throws down his lantern, and it shatters. He declares that he has come too early. The people in the marketplace are living in the quiet aftershock of an explosion they haven't yet seen or felt. The sound of the event is still traveling towards them across the abyss of time. The consequences of this event are total. The belief in God was the linchpin of the entire Western world. Christianity, as Nietzsche saw it, is a complete system. a whole view of things thought out together. It rests on the presupposition that human beings cannot know what is good or evil on their own. They need God, who alone knows it. By breaking this main concept, the faith in God, one breaks the whole system. When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. Nothing necessary remains in one's hands. This collapse leads directly to the arrival of the most terrifying guest imaginable, nihilism. Nietzsche dreads the coming of nihilism above all else. It is the slow, creeping realization that our highest values have devalued themselves. It is the feeling that life is without meaning or purpose. He sees himself as a prophet of this coming darkness, like the prophet Jeremiah warning of the destruction of Jerusalem. He is appalled at the thought of how people will behave once they finally grasp the full significance of what has happened. For centuries, greatness was found in God. With God gone, he who does not find greatness in God will find it nowhere. This leaves modern humanity with a terrifying burden. We stand at a crossroads where we must either deny that greatness exists at all, or we must learn to create it for ourselves. This is the challenge that the madman hurls at the uncomprehending crowd. He asks them, what festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? The silence of the crowd is his answer. They do not understand the question. They do not feel the crushing weight of this new responsibility. They are content in their smallness, unaware that the ground beneath their feet has disappeared. The death of God is the central crisis of modernity. It creates a vast, terrifying vacuum at the heart of Western culture. Nietzsche's philosophy, from this point forward, is a sustained and desperate attempt to answer the question that the madman leaves hanging in the air. After the old values have collapsed, after the old sun has set, what will fill the void? What new source of meaning can humanity create for itself to avoid plunging into the endless night of nihilism? This question would occupy him for the rest of his life. Chapter 9. Giving Style to Your Life. The death of God leaves a chilling vacuum at the heart of the world. With the old moral law gone, and the terror of nihilism looming on the horizon, a desperate question arises: how is one supposed to live? In the sun-drenched pages of The Gay Science, Nietzsche offers his first great creative answer to this problem. He puts forward a new kind of personal project, a path for the individual to walk in an age of collapsing values. He presents it as an art form, one that is both great and rare. In section 290 of that book, he lays out his vision. He calls it the one thing needful. The task is this: to give style to one's character. This is a profound and startling idea. He is calling for each individual to view their own life, their own self as a raw material to be shaped into a work of art. The person must become their own poet and sculptor, consciously crafting a life of beauty and integrity from the chaotic mess of their own nature. It is a project of radical self-creation. The process he describes is like that of an artist. It begins with a fearless and scrupulous survey of one's own nature. You must identify all of your strengths and all of your weaknesses, your passions and your fears, your virtues and your vices. Without flinching, you must see all the fragments of yourself with absolute honesty. This is the gathering of the clay, the marble, the pigments, all the material you have to work with. Once you have surveyed the material, the artistic work begins. The goal is to fit all these disparate elements into a coherent artistic plan. This is a long and patient process, a matter of long practice and daily work at it. Here, a large mass of second nature might be added, cultivating new habits and strengths. There, a piece of original nature might be carefully removed, pruning away a destructive impulse. It is an act of discipline and design. The treatment of one's flaws is a key part of this art. What about the ugly parts of the self that cannot be removed? The artist of life has two choices. The first is to conceal them, to hide them away skillfully within the larger composition. The second, more powerful choice is to reinterpret them and make them sublime. A weakness can be transformed into a source of strange beauty. Even the vague and unformed parts of the character, the parts that resist shaping, can be saved and used to beckon towards distant, immeasurable horizons. The ultimate sign of success in this project is unity. When the work is finally finished, it becomes evident how the constraint of a single taste governed and formed everything large and small. Every element has found its place within the whole. Then Nietzsche makes one of his most challenging claims. He says that whether this taste was good or bad is less important than one might suppose, if only it was a single taste. The integrity and coherence of the self-creation is what matters. The power to impose a single form on the chaos of one's nature is itself the highest value here. He expands on this with a beautiful poetic metaphor. He urges us to become the poets of our life, and to practice this art first of all in the smallest, most everyday matters. This means learning from artists how to make things beautiful and desirable for us, even when they are not so in themselves. It requires developing an aesthetic distance from our own experiences, learning how to frame them, how to edit them, how to see only certain aspects so that our lives become tolerable and at best beautiful to behold. This intense focus on crafting one's own life helps to explain his notorious critique of pity. He sees the religion of pity as something that commands us to lose our own way in order to come to the assistance of a neighbor. To be constantly distracted by the suffering of others is to abandon the great and difficult project of your own self-creation. For Nietzsche, rushing to help can be a form of arrogant intrusion, an attempt to play the role of fate in someone else's life, ignoring the possibility that their suffering is a necessary part of their own intricate path to style. The demand of the artist of life is therefore an austere and lonely one. His morality, as he puts it, says, "Live in seclusion so that you can live for yourself." One needs a kind of quiet solitude to complete the difficult work of shaping one's own soul. The constant noise and demands of others make this art form almost impossible. It is a path that requires a fierce and disciplined focus on one's own path. The project of giving style to one's life is Nietzsche's first great affirmative answer to the terror of nihilism. In a world without divine commandments, the individual must become their own lawgiver. It is an extreme, aristocratic individualism, a call to impose a beautiful, classical form on the romantic chaos of the self. This is the first step toward the creation of new values. Before one can hope to give meaning to the world, one must first succeed in the great and rare art of giving style to oneself. Chapter 10: Zarathustra and the Last Man. After the piercing analysis of daybreak and the bright explorations of the gay science, Nietzsche's philosophy takes a startling turn. He retreats from the world and from his aphoristic style to create his most strange and ambitious work. Thus spoke Zarathustra. The book was written in short, fevered bursts of inspiration. It reads like a sacred text from a lost religion, full of biblical pastiche, poems, and allegories. Its language is lofty, prophetic, and often deeply ambiguous. It is the work of a philosopher-poet, and it is here that Nietzsche unleashes his most famous and challenging ideas. The book's central figure is Zarathustra, a wise and solitary prophet who has spent 10 years in a mountain cave, absorbing the wisdom of the sun and the eagle. Finally, overflowing with this wisdom, he decides he must go down to humanity and share his teachings. He descends from his mountain peak like a modern-day Moses, ready to offer a new set of values to a world that has forgotten how to value anything at all. His first encounters with humanity, however, are met with confusion and ridicule. In the first town he reaches, he finds a crowd gathered to watch a tightrope walker. He takes this opportunity to deliver his first great teaching. He speaks of a future goal for humanity, something to strive for. Yet before he can speak of the goal, he must first issue a terrible warning. He paints a picture of where humanity is heading if it continues on its current path of seeking only comfort and security. He gives this end point a chilling name: the last man. The last man is the ultimate creature of mediocrity. He is the final product of a decadent and dying culture. The last man wants a life free from risk, from passion, from struggle, and from pain. Zarathustra describes his world in sardonic tones. It is a world where everyone is equal, where there are no more rich or poor, no rulers and no rule. Everyone has their little pleasure for the day and their little pleasure for the night, and they hold health in the highest regard. They have invented happiness, and they blink in contentment. Zarathustra's description of the last man is a portrait of ultimate spiritual decay. These are people who no longer understand ambition or longing. The earth has become small, and on it hops the last man who makes everything small. His race is as ineradicable as the flea beetle. The last man lives longest and is the most contented. He represents the final, pitiable state of a humanity that has chosen safety over greatness, and comfort over the creative struggle that gives life its meaning. The crowd in the marketplace does not recoil in horror at this image. Instead, they cheer. "Give us this last man, O Zarathustra," they cry. "Make us into these last men. You can have your hero." They have so completely lost the capacity for any higher aspiration that they see this picture of ultimate smallness as a desirable goal. They have embraced their own decline. This reaction shows Zarathustra that humanity is not yet ready for his true teaching. This experience reveals Zarathustra's unique and difficult role as a prophet. He is a teacher who must be rejected. After his first speeches, he gathers a few disciples, but he soon counsels them to leave him. One repays a teacher badly if one always remains nothing but a pupil, he says. I counsel you. Go away from me and resist Zarathustra. Perhaps he deceived you. He does not want blind followers or believers. He wants to provoke his listeners into finding their own way, into questioning even his own words. This is a central part of his running battle with the figure of Christ and the tradition of faith. Where other prophets demand belief, Zarathustra demands skepticism. He tells his disciples that they had not yet sought themselves when they found him, and for that reason, their faith amounts to little. His goal is to be a catalyst, a spark that ignites the fire of self-overcoming in others. He is a prophet who must eventually make himself obsolete. Throughout the book, Zarathustra is a figure prone to his own doubts and depressions. He is a prophet who is constantly tempted by his final sin, pity for man. He sees the smallness and the suffering of humanity, and he is pulled back toward the very values he is trying to overcome. His journey is a lonely one, and his teachings are often met with incomprehension. He is a tightrope walker himself, stretched between the animal past of humanity and the great distant future he hopes to announce. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is the vessel for Nietzsche's most radical affirmative ideas. The book is a strange and beautiful attempt to create a new kind of scripture, one that is rooted in the earth and in the affirmation of life, in all its terror and its joy. Having warned humanity about the abyss of the last man, Zarathustra must now begin the difficult task of pointing toward a new, higher possibility, a new meaning for the earth. He must teach them about the being who stands as the opposite of the last man, the Übermensch. Chapter 11. The Übermensch and Eternal Recurrence. From the strange, prophetic landscape of Thus Spoke, Zarathustra emerge two of the most famous and difficult concepts in all of Nietzsche's philosophy. These are the positive teachings that Zarathustra offers to the world as a remedy to the creeping nihilism of the last man. They are the Übermensch, or overman, and the doctrine of the eternal recurrence. These two ideas are deeply intertwined, and they represent the core of his affirmative project. Zarathustra presents the Übermensch as the new meaning of the earth. After the death of God, humanity can no longer find its purpose in an otherworldly realm. We must remain faithful to the earth and create our meaning here. The Übermensch is this new meaning. This is a goal for humanity to strive for. Man, Zarathustra says, is a rope tied over an abyss, a rope between beast and Übermensch. Humanity is a transitional stage, something to be overcome. The specific characteristics of the Übermensch, however, remain deliberately and frustratingly vague. This is a figure who will be as different from us as we are from the apes. He will be a being of immense creative power, a lawgiver who creates his own values. He will be free from the morality of pity and resentment that has defined Western culture. He will be a being who can affirm life in its entirety without reservation. Yet Nietzsche gives us very few concrete details. The Übermensch is presented more as a direction than a destination, a far-off peak whose full shape we can only guess at. This vagueness is perhaps intentional. The Übermensch is something to be created, and providing a detailed blueprint would defeat the purpose. The concept functions as an ideal that is so far removed from the squalid reality of modern man that its primary role is to highlight our own shortcomings. Like Jonathan Swift's rational Houyhnhnms, who highlight the disgusting nature of the Yahoos, the Übermensch is defined by what he is not. He is not small, he is not reactive, he is not resentful. The path to the Übermensch is described in one of Zarathustra's first speeches, the story of the three metamorphoses of the spirit. First, the spirit is a camel, weighed down by the heavy burden of traditional values and the command, "Thou shalt." In the loneliest desert, the camel transforms into a lion, a fierce, destructive spirit who can say no to the dragon of old values and win freedom for himself. The lion can say, "I will," yet even the lion cannot create new values. For that, a final transformation is needed. The praying lion must become a child. The child, for Zarathustra, represents innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. The child possesses the innocence of becoming and plays the game of creation with a holy seriousness. To create new values requires this sacred yes, this ability to begin anew. The spirit, having thrown off its old burdens and won its freedom, can now will its own will and conquer its own world. The ultimate test for this new, creative spirit, and the second of Zarathustra's great teachings, is the idea of the eternal recurrence. Nietzsche first introduced this idea in The Gay Science, where he called it the greatest weight. He asks us to imagine a demon stealing into our loneliest loneliness and telling us that our life, with every single pain and every single joy, every thought and every sigh, will have to be lived again and again, innumerable times more, in the exact same sequence. This thought is presented as the ultimate philosophical test. How would you react? Would you throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon? Or would you have a tremendous moment where you would answer, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? The ability to joyfully affirm this eternal repetition of everything, including all the suffering, all the ugliness, and all the waste, is the ultimate expression of a life-affirming spirit. The two concepts are inextricably linked. The Übermensch is the being who can not only endure the thought of eternal recurrence, but can will it, can embrace it with a love for fate, an amor fati. He is the one who can say yes to a single moment of joy, and, in doing so, say yes to all of woe, because all things are entangled, ensnared, enamored. Joy, for Zarathustra, is deeper than suffering, and all joy wills eternity, wills deep, deep eternity. To will one moment of joy is to will the return of everything. These concepts of the Übermensch and the eternal recurrence are Nietzsche's most ambitious and poetic attempt to provide a new earth-bound system of values. They are his answer to the nihilism of the last man. He offers a vision of humanity overcoming itself, led by a new kind of being who has the strength to create his own meaning and to love his fate so completely that he would will its infinite repetition. This is the highest and most difficult affirmation he could imagine. Chapter 12. Beyond Good and Evil. After the prophetic, poetic flights of "Thus spoke Zarathustra," Nietzsche returned to the sharp, aphoristic style of his middle period. His next book, Beyond Good and Evil, carries the subtitle Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. He insisted that everything he wrote after Zarathustra was a commentary on it. But this new work marks a significant shift in tone and method. The Übermensch is never mentioned again, and the eternal recurrence rarely recurs. He returns to the battlefield of philosophy itself. preparing to launch his most devastating assault on the foundations of Western thought. The book opens with a breathtakingly audacious move. Nietzsche decides to question the one value that all philosophers, for millennia, have taken for granted. He puts the will to truth itself under suspicion. He asks us to consider the strange prejudice of philosophers who seem to prefer truth even to life itself. With a series of riddling questions, he unsettles our most basic assumptions. Suppose we want truth, he asks. Why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? This is a profoundly disorienting question. To knowingly want untruth seems almost like a logical paradox. Yet Nietzsche is probing at the deep, unexamined assumption that truth is always preferable. What if, he speculates, certain kinds of untruth, illusion, deception, or ignorance are necessary conditions for life itself? What if our drive for truth at any cost is actually a symptom of a hidden, life-denying impulse? He's trying to get behind our valuations, to ask what value our value of truth really has. From here, he moves on to attack another of the great prejudices of metaphysics, the faith in opposite values. Philosophers, he notes, have always thought in terms of stark binaries, truth and error, good and evil, selflessness and selfishness, purity and lust. They have assumed that these things are fundamentally opposed and that the valued thing could never arise from its opposite. Because the world of our senses is filled with deception and wickedness, they had to posit a higher, purer realm, the lap of being or the thing in itself, as the origin of our values. Nietzsche pounces on this assumption with glee. He asks if there are any true opposites at all. What if these popular valuations are merely foreground estimates, only provisional perspectives? He suggests that a higher and more fundamental value for life might be ascribed to the very things we have condemned: deception, selfishness, and lust. He pushes the thought even further, proposing that the value of our good and revered things might be precisely that they are insidiously related, tied to, and involved with their wicked opposites, perhaps even one with them in essence. This line of thought is designed to completely demoralize our traditional intellectual conscience. He claims that the falseness of a judgment is not, for him, a necessary objection to it. The real question is to what extent that judgment is life-promoting, life-preserving species, preserving perhaps even species cultivating. A philosophy that dares to risk this, that dares to recognize untruth as a condition of life, would, by that token alone, place itself beyond good and evil. To be beyond good and evil in this sense is to take up the position of a cultural anthropologist looking at one's own society. It is to see our moral judgments not as absolute truths, but as a system of prejudices, a set of contingent beliefs that serve the physiological demands of a certain kind of life. It requires achieving a pathos of distance from the very values that constitute us. The new philosopher of the future must be able to stand apart and diagnose the hidden instincts that drive even the most abstract philosophical systems. This raises a difficult question for Nietzsche's own philosophy. If we are all products of our environment and our drives, how can he achieve this lofty, God's eye view of the human condition? His answer lies in his famous doctrine of perspectivism. There are no facts, only interpretations. There is only a perspective seeing, only a perspective knowing, he writes. Objectivity, then, is achieved by allowing as many different effects, as many different perspectives to speak about one thing as possible. He demonstrates this method in his own writing, constantly shifting his point of view, taking up various attitudes to a problem, and delighting in the complexity of the phenomena. He is always trying to see things from the perspective of life itself. Life, for him, is the ultimate criterion. But what does he mean by life? He seems to mean something close to vitality, power, and the overabundance of a creative force. He venerates a figure like Goethe for his ability to organize a multitude of diverse impulses into an impressive, productive whole. With beyond good and evil, Nietzsche moves away from the prophetic mode of Zarathustra and begins to lay the groundwork for his most penetrating analysis of our moral world. He has questioned the value of truth and has shown that our most cherished values might be built on a foundation of lies and illusion. He has set the stage for a historical and psychological investigation into the origins of our concepts of good and evil. This investigation, which will become his masterpiece, The Genealogy of Morals, will trace our morality back to a primal struggle between two fundamental human types, the master and the slave. Chapter 13: Masters, Slaves, and the Will to Power. Having placed a question mark over the value of truth itself, Nietzsche now embarks on his most profound and daring historical investigation. In his masterpiece, The Genealogy of Morals, he seeks to unearth the origins of our moral prejudices. He subtitles the book A Polemic, signaling his intent to wage war on our comfortable assumptions. He acts as a philosophical archaeologist, digging down through the layers of history to expose the brutal, bloody, and all too human origins of our concepts of good and evil. He is searching for the moment when our values were first forged. His investigation reveals two fundamentally different sources of morality born from two fundamentally different human types, the masters and the slaves. First, we have master morality. This is the value system of the noble, the powerful, the first rank of humanity. These figures do not look outside themselves for validation. Their morality is a spontaneous affirmation of who they are. They experience their own strength, health, and power, and they call it good. It is a simple, overflowing, self-celebratory gesture. The master type creates values out of this feeling of distance from those they see as beneath them. They look upon the low, the common, the plebeian, and they label them bad. This bad is almost an afterthought, a pale shadow cast by the bright sun of their own good. The noble soul is incorrigibly healthy, largely indifferent to the suffering of others, and uninterested in condemnation. They are too full of their own vitality to be consumed with hatred. Theirs is a morality of action and affirmation. Then we have the second type, slave morality. This value system is born in a completely different psychological landscape. It originates with the oppressed, the weak, the suffering, the priestly caste who are powerless in a worldly sense. Their morality begins with a negation. They look upon the powerful masters, the nobles who crush them, and live with such joyful indifference, and a deep, simmering resentment begins to burn within them. This creative, venomous feeling, which Nietzsche calls by the French term ressentiment, becomes the engine of a whole new way of valuing the world. The first act of slave morality is to look outwards and say, no. It looks upon the master and declares him to be evil. The master's strength, his pride, his health, his happiness, all of these are redefined as wicked and dangerous. Only after this initial act of condemnation does slave morality turn back to itself. If the master is evil, then the slave, who is the opposite of the master, must therefore be good. The meek, the poor in spirit, the suffering, the humble, all those who are bad from the master's perspective, are now transfigured into the morally good. This, for Nietzsche, was the greatest moral coup ever perpetrated in history. It was a revaluation of all values carried out by the seemingly powerless. The Jews, in their captivity, and later the Christians, managed to convince their rulers, the noble masters of the Roman Empire, to adopt the value system of the very people they had conquered. They made the masters feel ashamed of their own strength and pride, and taught them to value pity, humility, and modesty instead. Slave morality, born of weakness and resentment, ultimately triumphed. Underpinning this entire struggle is the fundamental force that drives all of existence, the will to power. Zarathustra had taught that life is not a mere will to existence, a simple drive to survive, as Schopenhauer had thought. Life is a will to expand, to overcome, to grow, to discharge its strength, to create. Every being, from the smallest organism to the most complex human society, is driven by this will to power. It is the voice that commands every people to esteem certain things, to create a tablet of the good that hangs over them. This tablet is the voice of their will to power. The masters and the slaves simply express their will to power in different ways. The master's will is direct and creative. He imposes his values on the world through his own overflowing strength. The slave's will is more subtle, more cunning, and ultimately more world-changing. Unable to exert his power physically, he does so psychologically. He exercises his will to power by being subtler than his masters, by convincing them that his values are the only true values. He converts them to his way of seeing the world. Nietzsche's genealogy is a profoundly unsettling story. He shows us that our modern Western morality, the morality of compassion, equality, and pity, has its roots not in a divine commandment, but in the venomous resentment of the powerless. It is a system designed to make the strong weak and the weak feel virtuous. It is the triumph of the herd over the individual, of the sick over the healthy. He forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our most cherished virtues are the product of a historical act of revenge. By digging down to these origins, Nietzsche performs his most radical critique. He reveals that there is nothing absolute or necessary about our moral framework. It is a human, all too human creation, forged in a specific historical struggle. This realization opens up a terrifying and exhilarating possibility. If morality is a creation, then it can be overcome. New values can be created. This is the great project that Nietzsche sets for the philosopher of the future, to move beyond the ancient battle of masters and slaves and to create a new table of values for a stronger, healthier, and more life-affirming humanity. Chapter 14, Philosophizing with a Hammer. In the year 1888, the last year of his sane life, Nietzsche's productivity became torrential. He worked with a fevered, almost superhuman energy, producing a series of brilliant, explosive pamphlets that served as the final summation of his life's work. The tone of these last books is one of hard, crystalline clarity. He had moved beyond the prophetic mode of Zarathustra and the deep, scholarly digging of the genealogy. This was the time for settling accounts. This was the time for the hammer. One of his final works, Twilight of the Idols, carries the provocative subtitle, How to Philosophize with a Hammer. This phrase perfectly captures his late method. The hammer, he explains, is to be used like a tuning fork. He approaches the ancient, revered idols, the great, hollow concepts of Western thought, like reason, virtue, truth, and God, and he gives them a light, cautious tap. His goal is to listen to the sound they make. A full resonant tone might indicate something of value. A dull, empty thud reveals the idol to be hollow, bloated with hot air, and ready to be smashed. With this hammer in hand, he conducts a final, devastating survey of his great preoccupations. he returns one last time to his former friend and eternal adversary, Richard Wagner. He portrays Wagner as the quintessential modern artist, a master of theatricality and hypnotic effects, but at his core, a symptom of decadence. Wagner's art, he argues, with its focus on redemption and its obsession with problems that belong in a hospital, is the perfect expression of a sick, weary, and exhausted culture. It is an art form for the little decadents of Paris, not for a strong and healthy spirit. Yet even in this final, ferocious attack, one can feel Nietzsche's abiding love for the forbidden things. His analysis of Wagner's music, especially Tristan und Isolde, is filled with an almost painful eloquence. He seems to be settling a personal account, wrestling with the ghost of the man whose art meant more to him than any other. His critique is a strange and complex kind of inverted eulogy, a testament to the enduring power of the very thing he felt compelled to denounce. From Wagner, he turns his hammer to the most powerful idol of all, Christianity. In his book, The Antichrist, he unleashes his most glorious and passionate polemic. He attacks the priests, the theologians, and the entire edifice of the church with righteous fury, accusing them of corrupting and falsifying the original message of their founder. At the very center of this strident attack, he offers a startling and lyrical portrait of the figure of Christ himself. He portrays Christ as a great symbolist, a kind of holy idiot who accepted only inner realities, as truths. This Jesus lived a life of practice, a life of blessedness, and his kingdom of God was a state of the heart, available here and now. He was a figure who taught a radical new way of being, a way of love and non-resistance. This portrait reaches such heights of ecstatic praise that it becomes a challenge for Nietzsche to pull back into his attack. He manages it by making a sharp distinction between this original Christ and the man who, in his view, hijacked the movement, St. Paul. He sees Paul and the founders of the church as having taken this beautiful, personal, inner reality and turned it into a vulgar system of belief, punishment, and power. They invented the ideas of sin, resurrection, and judgment, transforming a gospel of blessedness into a religion of resentment and revenge. They corrupted the teachings of the great symbolist to serve their own will to power. Throughout these final works, a characteristic tension in Nietzsche's thought becomes almost unbearable. On the one hand, there is the puritanical ascetic, the man obsessed with intellectual cleanliness at any price, who demands that we face the ugly truth, no matter how much it hurts. On the other hand, there is the high-flying hedonist, the Dionysian spirit, who argues that an action demanded by the instinct of life is proved to be right by the pleasure that accompanies it. He wages war on the nihilist, who considers pleasure an objection to truth. Nowhere is this tension more powerfully on display than in his final celebration of his own ideal human type. Having abandoned the vague concept of the Übermensch, he now holds up the figure of the German poet Goethe as the prototype of the higher man. Goethe, for Nietzsche, was the great affirmer of life. He fought against the separation of reason, senses, feeling, and will. He disciplined himself to wholeness. He created himself. Goethe, he writes, was a spirit who became free, a spirit who could stand amidst the cosmos with a joyous and trusting fatalism. This is the spirit who has faith that only the particular is loathsome, and that all is redeemed in the whole. This, Nietzsche declares, is the highest of all possible faiths, and he baptizes it with the name of his old god, Dionysus. This is the final vision, a complete and total affirmation of existence, born from a spirit strong enough to organize the chaos within itself into a beautiful whole. It is the last luminous vision before the twilight finally fell. Chapter 15, The Final Question, Affirming Life. After the fury of the hammer, after the diagnosis of decadence and the unearthing of our moral history, we arrive at Nietzsche's final question and his ultimate answer. Having shown us the abyss of nihilism, he now offers his most difficult and profound teaching. It is a formula for living in a world without divine meaning, a final, courageous response to the terror of a silent universe. He gives this final wisdom a Latin name, amor fati, the love of one's fate. This is the goal that all his philosophy has been striving towards. In the gay science, he had declared it as a kind of New Year's resolution. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor fati. Let that be my love henceforth. It is the will to want nothing to be different. Not forwards, not backwards, not in all eternity. It is the challenge to love what happens, to embrace necessity as if it were a choice. This idea is deeply connected to his most challenging doctrine, the eternal recurrence. To truly love one's fate is to be able to will that your life, with every joy and every sorrow, every moment of triumph, and every second of agonizing pain, should be repeated infinitely, exactly as it was. The thought of the small man recurring was the deepest objection Zarathustra could raise against his own teaching. To overcome that nausea, to affirm the eternal return of even the most loathsome particulars, requires a godlike strength of spirit. This is the ultimate test of affirmation. It is easy to say yes to the good parts of life, to the moments of happiness, love, and success. The great challenge is to affirm the whole. Nietzsche's philosophy demands that we see existence as a single, unified text, where every word is necessary for the meaning of the whole. To say, yes to one single moment of joy is to say yes to everything that made that moment possible, which means saying yes to all of history, with all its horror and all its absurdity. In his final works, he finds this spirit embodied in the figure of Dionysus, the ancient god of tragedy, now reborn as a philosophical faith. The Dionysian spirit is the one who has become free, who can stand amidst the cosmos with a joyous and trusting fatalism. This spirit has attained the highest of all possible faiths, the faith that only the particular is loathsome, and that all is redeemed in the whole. This is a radical, almost inhuman perspective, a way of looking at existence from such a height that all the ugly details blur into a single, beautiful, and necessary pattern. This leads to one of the most powerful and disturbing paradoxes in all of his thought. Nietzsche, the great philosopher of becoming and change, seems to arrive at a position where he must will that everything stay the same forever. The man who railed so passionately against the way things are embraces a formula for loving things exactly as they are. This is the tension between Nietzsche the critic and Nietzsche the affirmer, a tension that he never fully resolves, but which gives his philosophy its incredible dynamic energy. He recognizes this paradox himself. In an unpublished note, he writes that the desire that something should be different from what it is involves a condemnatory critique of the whole. But life itself, he concludes, is such a desire. To be alive is to want to be different, to estimate, to prefer, to be unjust. To live according to life is to be in a constant state of overcoming. How can this be reconciled with the total acceptance of amor fati? Perhaps the answer lies in the will itself, in the final, breathtaking passage of the genealogy of morals. Nietzsche considers the meaning of the ascetic ideal, the will to self-denial that has dominated humanity for so long. He concludes that humanity has a deep horror of meaninglessness. Suffering itself is not the problem. The meaninglessness of suffering is the curse that has lain over mankind so far. The ascetic ideal, for all its life-denying poison, at least gave suffering a meaning. It saved the will by giving it something to will. This leads to his final, staggering conclusion. The ascetic ideal, this hatred of the human, of the senses, of life itself, is ultimately a will to nothingness, an aversion to life, a rebellion against the most fundamental presuppositions of life. Yet, he insists, it is and remains a will. And then, the last words of the book, which can stand as the last words of his entire philosophical project. Man would rather will nothingness than not will. Here, at the very end, is the final justification for affirmation. The human spirit cannot endure a vacuum. It must have a goal. it must will something. In the wake of the death of God, the choice is between the decadent, life-denying will to nothingness, or the difficult, courageous, life-affirming will of amor fati. The final challenge Nietzsche leaves us with is to become strong enough to turn our will away from the abyss of nihilism and towards the joyful, terrible, and eternal affirmation of life itself in all its chaotic and beautiful necessity.